Hey, today we're going to talk about psychological disorders. We'll have two videos on this last chapter that we have for the semester. I hope you're doing well, and we'll just get started. So the history of psych disorders. This is chapter 15, which I really need to read, and I really want you to watch the videos that I posted over the weekend. In ancient times, well, even in recent times, people with psychological disorders who had symptoms that other people were not sharing were treated in all sorts of horrible ways. You can see in this picture here that there was a method called trephining, which in ancient times, if a person was hearing voices other people weren't hearing, they would drill a hole in the skull, thinking that that would leave like a portal for the evil spirits to escape. The problem with that was it often was fatal. But even as recently as the 1960s in Missouri, they were using what was called the lobotomy as a treatment for anything from depression to schizophrenia. And that was roughly the same kind of thing, except it took like taking like an ice pick and shoving along the plane of the nose into the eye, because the part of the skull behind the eyeball is the thinnest. And they would poke into there and then scramble the neurons in the frontal lobe. And you know what happens to people with no frontal lobe. You remember Phineas Gage. Not scientifically researched, and yet it was used to treat people with psychological disorders. We have in place in this time in the psychologist and psychiatric world a system of doing diagnosis of disorders that are psychological. Now, psychological disorders are different because they're not like a broken arm where you can see it on x-ray and go like, oh yeah, you have a bone that's broken. So psychologists and social workers and psychiatrists and all sorts of people have worked together in research teams trying to come up with what is a good way to figure out if somebody actually has a disorder. They call it the 3 Ds of diagnosis. And if these 3 are present, it's likely that someone might be diagnosable with a disorder. The first one is deviant. I have this picture here of this young person doing a selfie in front of a casket. That's unusual. That really should not be happening. But that's not, I mean, that's not enough of a criteria. Just because something's odd or unusual doesn't mean that a person has a disorder. But it's a red flag. I mean, if you see a person walking around Jefferson City, like in the middle of August with like 5 winter coats on, maybe they don't have any place to put their winter coats, but also that's indicative that maybe something else is going on because it's highly unusual. Also, if a person is distressed, they're worried about their symptoms. They're crying, they're feeling upset, or they're also distressing others. That is another red flag that someone might actually have a disorder. The third one I think is the most important. That's why they call them the 3 Ds of diagnosis: deviant, distressing, dysfunctional. Dysfunctional means I get in the way of my own goals. So if I have a goal to complete school, yet I can't get out of bed, I can't go to class, I can't do my assignments because I'm so depressed, that's dysfunctional. I'm getting in the way of my own goals. So if you have these 3 together, deviance and a person's really distressed or worried about their own symptoms, and they're not being able to accomplish their own goals, then we're probably talking that someone has a disorder that's recognizable. We use a system called the DSM. This is a catalog of mental disorders. It came out about 7 years ago. This is the 5th version. I mean, they started in the 1930s, I believe, with version 1. It's gotten more advanced based on the research that's been done. Now, some say there's some good things about diagnosis, and some say there's bad things about diagnosis. You can probably guess what might some of the good things be, if you think about it. I mean, if you're dealing with a disorder yourself, I mean, wouldn't it be helpful if when you go to seek help, the person who's providing the help has a way of recognizing the whole set of symptoms you're seeing as something that's treatable, something that's been researched, something where there's good data on it showing like this is the best way to treat it? And that's what we have for advantages and disadvantages. Research and treatment can be consistent, and we can communicate with other psychological professionals about, okay, this person is dealing with suicidal thoughts, hopelessness, crying all the time, lack of energy, social withdrawal. This is depression. I mean, you can just identify that pretty quickly. And if I say this person has major depression, in one phrase, I've communicated what a person is dealing with as a therapy client. The disadvantages might also be fairly obvious. The biggest one is stigma. Stigma is just like not valuing someone. This is like any marginalized group where discrimination happens. I mean, imagine if you have a job and your boss brings in someone and says, oh, here, I just hired this new person and they broke their arm playing softball. You're not going to remember that 5 years later. But if your boss brings in somebody new and says, hey, I just hired this person, she has multiple personality disorder, you're going to like remember that. And that's stigma. And you're going to think, oh, she's a little off. She's a little unusual. And that's a problem with having labels like this. And when you get a label like that applied to you, like if you've been diagnosed with schizophrenia, a lot of times that's all everyone sees. Oh, you have schizophrenia, you have schizophrenia. It's like, no, a person with schizophrenia has their favorite music. They have their favorite food. They have people they love in their lives. So the disadvantages of coming up with labels is it can really stigmatize a person and then make other people not see anything other than the diagnosis. The really weird thing about this is that if you look how frequent mental disorders are, psychological disorders, they are very, in the overall population, when this is people who are not seeking services, any psychological services, about half of the overall US population can be diagnosed with a psychological disorder within their lifetime. If you look at different types of disorders, and I'm going to start walking through anxiety disorders right now. You know what anxiety disorders or what anxiety is. Anxiety is just feeling worked up and having trouble concentrating and having fast thoughts go through your head and maybe feeling muscle tension, things like that. We got 3 major types of anxiety disorders I want to talk about at first. And it includes generalized anxiety disorder called GAD, panic disorder, and phobias. So generalized anxiety disorder. I use this picture to illustrate it because anxiety is experienced like walking around in a fog. It's like no matter where a person goes, if they have this disorder, they can run as fast as they want. They're still going to be enveloped by this sense of anxiety. It's called free-floating anxiety. I mean, they can, and the thing is, the thing a person worries about when they have this disorder is always changing. So a person can think, oh, I have this test coming up. I have this test coming up. The test can pass. It's like, oh, now I have a paper due. It's like, oh, what I have a lot of work I have to do. They'll always be able to think of something to worry about. The biggest things that make generalized anxiety disorder distinct and separate from other anxiety disorders is that you have this verbal worry and muscle tension. A person has an ongoing dialogue in their head. What about this? What about that? Now I'm worried about that one. I got to think about that. And so it's ongoing and it won't stop. And it makes the person just kind of tense up. So a person with GAD is often going to have neck problems, back problems, also gut problems because the person's so worried all the time that their guts are going to be all kind of tightened up. And they're going to have difficulty concentrating because they're always having other things going on in their mind. Some of the things that go on with this, if a person is experiencing this, they'll often drink a lot or smoke a lot of weed. And that's not necessarily good coping. So obviously, and sometimes it leads to suicidality. So it's a stressful disorder for those who have it. The next anxiety disorder I'd want to briefly talk about is panic disorder. I use this picture to illustrate it because instead of anxiety being experienced as a fog, it's like a person zapped suddenly by just this intense wave of anxiety. And it peaks within a 10-minute period. A person will start to feel it and it'll go up and it'll ramp up really quickly. Here are some of the symptoms of a single panic attack. You got pounding heart, sweating, trembling, shortness of breath, feeling like you're choking, chest pain. A lot of people feel like they're having a heart attack and they go to the hospital. They feel nauseous, like things aren't real, they're going to die. So watch the one video I have on there of a person films their own panic attack. Started in like minute 6. But also, I want you to watch the other video on that where a person has panic attacks when they're in certain situations. So if a person has repeated panic attacks, they can be diagnosed with panic disorder. About 4% of the population has it. Women are more likely to report it, but it's weird. Actually, if you look at the anxiety disorders and depression, women appear to have more of that and men appear to have less, but men have a lot more substance abuse. So if you take away the substance abuse, or you treat the substance abuse, men end up coming up and meeting the level of depression and anxiety disorders that women have. Let's see, I'm trying to think about other things I want to tell you about panic. It's associated with a type of phobia because you can imagine if you have had a panic attack in your favorite restaurant when we can go back to restaurants, you go to a restaurant, you have a panic attack. You don't want to go back to that restaurant, so you avoid it. And then you have a panic attack in a class, so you stop going to that class. And then you have a panic attack in a movie theater, so you don't go to the movie. So after a while, a person starts to avoid all these situations. That's not good either. If you look at what happens frequently with panic disorder, it coincides with a type of phobia called agoraphobia. And phobias is a third type of anxiety disorder I want to talk about. But one specific type, the third type there, agoraphobia, is this fear of being in a place where escape is going to be difficult and impossible, and a person's afraid they're going to have a panic attack in front of other people, and so where they can't escape. So they just stay home all the time, and they don't leave their house, and they're afraid to go anywhere. The treatment for this kind of thing is typically, you'll see in the elevator video I posted online, is exposure, slow exposure, and training about how to talk to oneself during this kind of during a panic attack, and also how to breathe and keep yourself calm and realize, like, okay, my heart's pounding. That doesn't mean I'm dying. That doesn't mean I'm going to have a full-blown panic attack. It's just a bodily response to an anxious situation. So the self-talk is critical in dealing with agoraphobia along with panic. And these two disorders co-occur together a lot. So going back to this, we have three types of phobias. I've just mentioned one, agoraphobia, fear of going out in public places because a person's afraid they're going to have a panic attack where they can't get alone and not embarrass themselves. There's also specific phobias. These are just fears, like a person's like, oh, I don't like spiders. No, this is something where the fear gets in the way of their everyday life. So this is something that is, a serious problem for a person. You have all different types of specific phobias too. So we have animal phobias, obviously insects and snakes and dogs, natural environments, sometimes storms, and people fear heights. Situational types, like crossing a bridge, some people get really scared of that. Blood injury injection is a weird type because in that situation, most phobias, a person encounters the thing that they fear and their heart rate goes up and their blood pressure goes up. But if a person sees their own blood, their heart rate actually goes down and their blood pressure goes down. It's genetically an inheritable type of phobia. We think that basically this is a type of phobia that has helped people survive, because if you have your blood pressure drop and your heart rate drop, when you see your own blood, you're less likely to bleed out. One thing about phobias, most people don't seek treatment for them. Negative reinforcement works in a critical way here. Let's say that you're afraid of dogs and you're walking down the street and you have a phobia of dogs. You see a dog, your anxiety goes up to here. So what do? You avoid it. When you avoid it, your anxiety goes down. So if you increase avoidance behavior, and that takes away something aversive, like your anxiety, this is going back to chapter 6, that means negative reinforcement is keeping your phobia in place. That's why exposure therapy is the way to treat phobias, where you slowly, first you have to train a person to keep their breathing calm and slow, their heart rate down, and slowly expose them to the thing that they fear. Again, with their permission, if they want to be treated. Here's some just common phobias that people have. The last type of phobia I want to talk about is social phobias. And these are unreasonable fears of embarrassment, being negatively evaluated by others. I think this has increased quite a bit with the advent of social media and people pretty much only doing connections with Instagram, TikTok, whatever you got. Having one-on-one interactions is a lot more terrifying for more people than I've ever seen in my life, clients and students included. People are afraid that they're just going to be judged. And this often looks specific. I mean, speaking in public is probably the number one social phobia. Eating in front of others, afraid you're going to be judged by how you eat. Even signing your name in front of other people's, because you're afraid that you're going to be asked to do your signature, and if you get nervous, then you're like, oh my God, they're going to think I don't even know how to write my own name. It exists. And another type of social phobia is using the bathroom in public. Not actually in public, but using a public bathroom. And some people just can't do it and it's a weird thought to think, like, am I being evaluated by my pee? But again, it doesn't mean it's rational. These phobias are not necessarily rational, but they can all typically be treated with good exposure therapy. I'm at the 15-minute mark, so I'm going to end that right there. There'll be another video later.